you could argue a long-term change. This isn't the time to be like, let's start something new from a fresh start. This is stuff that we've been working on. This is stuff that, it hasn't gone anywhere anytime soon, but maybe you've been in the middle of it and maybe it's time to start changing those plans. Welcome back to the Astrology Report. My name is Cam White, and this week we are talking about December 26th through January 1st of 2023. That's right. We are going to be going into the new year by this week. We have Venus making a sextile to Neptune. Venus is going to be conjoining Mercury, but they're kind of both conjoining each other because of the retrograde thing. Mercury stations retrograde this week. That's really the big highlight of this week, is the Mercury retrograde. We have Venus conjoining Pluto, which will be kind of interesting given the last time that Venus conjoined Pluto. And Mercury going retrograde will make a sextile to Neptune once it starts its retrograde. So all in all, this week doesn't have like super major things. It's just this Mercury retrograde that's really setting the tone for everything. So as we start on Monday, we're going to be having the moon still in Aquarius as we left off last week, making a conjunction to Saturn. And that's really it. So Monday's going to feel a little stale, a little boring. And the only thing I really want to talk about is, now that we're in Capricorn season, now we're here in winter, we're getting ready for this Mercury retrograde. I think the moon being in Aquarius is, the difference between Capricorn and Aquarius, in my opinion, is Capricorn is like, it's a cardinal sign, right? So we're starting something, we're initiating something, we are moving forward into something. And Aquarius is the fixation of that, right? Like think of it in the opposite spectrum. Think of Cancer and Leo. Cancer is the beginning of summer. Leo just extends that out, right? Like the beginning of summer, everyone's like, oh, it's summer. We're going to go have fun. We're going to go here. We're going to go there. But then it's like Leo season. It's like, oh, it's hot. Like this is hot. And it's, what are we doing here? Aquarius season, when you talk about Aquarius as a sign, it's a fixed sign. So there's a lot of keeping things stable, keeping things fixated. And as the moon's in Aquarius, there is this kind of like, there's a lot of ambition and energy when you first start something. But then when you continue it on for a few weeks, it gets a little boring. It gets a little stale. And that's what reminds me of Aquarius. It's like you're on the other side of things now and you're here. And you don't have to enjoy every single minute of it. But as the moon conjoins Saturn, there is this sort of, melancholy feeling of like, I'm doing this. I'm on this side. This is, difficult. This is challenging. What is nice though is that this is the moon is starting to wax here. The moon is starting to gain in some light, and I think as the moon is hitting Saturn, there is this sort of like it reminds me of if you ever got up, like I don't know how, I'm sure some of you get up like pretty early in the morning, like 4 or 5, and when you get up in the morning and there's this kind of like maybe I don't want to get up and it's too early, and then there are those days where you kind of get up early in the morning and you just kill your day and you crush your day. And it feels good. It feels good to get a lot of hard work done like first thing in the morning. That's what this reminds me a lot of. I think though with the moon on top of Saturn, there is this heavy distance, right? We're still in the Saturn and Aquarius period. There still is this heaviness around, society, around ideas, around governments, systems, regulations, all of that stuff. So there can be this kind of feeling of being trapped. Saturn and Aquarius reminds me of a glass box. It's like there's no physical borders, but there's a mental border. I mean, think about it with, I know I use this analogy a lot, but when Saturn was in Capricorn during pretty much 2018 through 2020, I mean, there was a lot of like, a big rhetoric throughout that time was build the wall, right? Like they were talking about like a physical wall. And what's interesting is once we got to 2020 through now 2022 and a little bit into 2023, it's like there's been a wall, but not physically, mentally, through ideas, right? I know through the pandemic and through everything, so many people's friendships changed, so many people's jobs changed, so many people's lives changed just based off this mental border. And I think with the moon conjoining Saturn, that heaviness of that might still come back. And that could look in a lot of different ways. But for some people, it's like feeling like there's a glass box between you and maybe someone else, or you and where you want to go, or you and your next, your next step. So Monday's not necessarily bad, it's just heavy. And so I would kind of just say, it's just one of those days to just kind of get through it. It's not the worst day ever. I think it'll be easy to get in a pout. But once the moon leaves that conjunction to Saturn and the moon kind of goes void, it's kind of like whatever. It's kind of like, maybe you want to go do some work at a coffee shop and you invite some friends and maybe they all ditch you and you're like, oh, well, that sucks, but whatever. Let me just get my work done. We get into Tuesday, and on Tuesday, the moon is going to ingress into Pisces and make a square to Mars. So this is where it gets a little bit weird. I'm actually really looking forward to this moon in Pisces transit because it's kind of got a lot of action with it. But also on Tuesday, Venus is going to make a sextile to Neptune. The next few days with this moon in Pisces transit seems really creative, seems really fun for the most part. But on Tuesday, as the moon makes this square to Mars, there is this kind of like, where am I going? What am I doing? Is this the right way? Is this not the right way? You know, the moon in Pisces is something I talk a lot about with Pisces is that like it bases its emotions off the environment. Like I always say that Pisces is the most true water sign because water is, a liquid, a solid, or a gas depending on its temperature, right? And so that moon in Pisces is kind of like, it's here, it's there, depending on your environment or the people that you're around can really affect that. But as the moon makes this square to Mars, there's this sort of confusion on where to go, what's next. I want you to notice that Mars is at 9 degrees right now. We're almost to the Mars station direct. We are almost over with Mars retrograde. That's kind of crazy to think about because it's been a long time coming. But as the moon makes this square to Mars, it's like you want to get things done, but this Mars retrograde is still like, no, we're still kind of reviewing and going over everything. We still haven't had Mercury go retrograde yet. And I think because Mercury hasn't gone retrograde yet, and this moon makes the square to Mars, there is this sort of like feeling that confusion of feeling like, oh, is this actually the right plan? Is this actually the right way to do things? Now, with the moon in Pisces, there's a level of, something that I think a lot about is kind of like, because, I've been working on music for a long time, and a problem that I have is like, have you ever drawn something and you just scribbled on it too much to where it's just a fucking mess? That's kind of reminds me of what Tuesday is like if you are just like going like, oh, well, maybe it needs this or maybe it needs that, and you're here, the whole image, the greater image is going to get really confusing and it's not going to look as neat and as clean. So I think on Tuesday, watching, where your emotions are invested into of like, oh, well, what if I did this and jumping from here to there, that might make the bigger picture a lot more messy. And I think what a lot of the other part of it too is with the moon in Pisces is like sometimes things just are as good as they're going to get. With the moon in Pisces too, our emotions are a little bit all over the place. Something I enjoy about the moon in Pisces is like when we're talking about our emotions, we're talking about the body, we're talking about how we feel day to day. Pisces is like getting that, mind, body, spirit alignment going. If you are too worried on your external factors for you to feel comfortable, you're going to lose it when the moon's in Pisces. But if you can just sit down, be quiet, again, mind, body, spirit connection, allow, higher source or your God or whatever you want to refer to, take those steps in with them or with that, I think it'll be a lot easier to handle. So Venus is going to sextile Neptune. And I mean, last winter, we had 3 Venus-Neptune sextiles. We had that Venus retrograde in Capricorn. And, for me personally, and I saw this with a lot of other people, the creative energy was so there, right? Like Venus in Capricorn is like, again, business, and, enjoying the program, enjoying the system. And sextiling Neptune is that, when there's a system in place, when there's rules that are enforced, it's easier for that creativity to come in, right? Like if it's just a free-for-all for everything, it's hard to get creative because anything is really possible. But I've said this before, when it comes to creativity, when there are certain, boundaries or certain limits or certain thresholds that you can't go over, that allows room for creativity to really come to play. So I think as Venus is in Capricorn sextiling Neptune, this does allow a lot more room for creativity. I think this does allow for a lot of room to have a bigger vision. There are things I hate about Neptune. We all know I hate Neptune, but there are some good things about it. And I like sextiles in Neptune specifically because this is kind of like it's not, a trine to Neptune is like almost feeling overwhelmed with everything that you don't know, everything that you think you know. What is a lie? What is real? But the sextile to Neptune, I think, is really powerful for getting that creativity flowing and seeing that vision a little bit clearer. Yes, the moon will be squaring Mars. So how you do that is like a whole nother thing. But that vision in your head and your enjoyment of being creative of what system you have to implement to create that vision, I think is really the good part. I just think the actual taking action of it is the difficult part here. But I think the big issue on Tuesday is just feeling confused and overwhelmed with what options you have, what options you don't have, what do I do, what do I not do, and that's just what Tuesday is. That changes throughout the week, so it's not just like everything is all for naught on Tuesday. We will get, throughout the week, we will have some opportunities to fix some of these changes, but I think on Tuesday, it's just realizing that bigger picture is not clear, realizing that there's still some T's that you have to cross and I's that you have to dot. So as we go into Wednesday, this is when the moon conjoins Neptune and makes a sextile to both Venus and Mercury. And this is where I think it becomes a little bit easier. Again, typically I don't like moon-Neptune conjunctions because just everything just dissolves and everything is just very confusing. And for some people that can be really, really overwhelming and they just kind of like give up. For other people, they can get really in tune for their spirituality and really in tune to like their Christ consciousness type stuff. But I think as the moon's on Neptune making the sextile to Mercury and Venus, this does allow for, I think, putting the pieces together. This is that moon making that aspect to Mercury and Venus on Neptune. So it's connecting these dots of, all right, Neptune's like the greater vision, right? Neptune is the ideal that we have in our head, and Mercury and Venus is how we're operating to achieve that ideal. And I think moon conjoining Neptune and sextiling Mercury and Venus is just putting those pieces together. So while Tuesday might feel a little frustrating, Tuesday might feel like it's like you just don't know what to do next, I think that really comes through on Wednesday. So that's really exciting. But then on Thursday, we have a ton going on. Number one, the moon goes into Aries and it will conjoin Jupiter. Then we have Mercury actually stationing retrograde. And Venus will conjoin Mercury. And technically, I wasn't sure exactly how to write this because Mercury and Venus will conjoin each other essentially. They will be mutually applying to each other. And the moon will make a sextile to Mars after all of this. So let's kind of go over all of this. This is a lot. So number one, Mercury goes retrograde. And I think that's the most important thing. Because like I've been saying, you know, this is our first Mercury retrograde with Mars retrograde. And why that's important is Mars is in the sign of Mercury. Mars is in Mercury's house, and now Mercury is going to go retrograde. And Mercury is in the exalted sign of Mars. Mars is exalted in Capricorn. So there's a lot of symbiotic relationship going on here, even though they're not making an aspect to each other. And now that Mercury is retrograde in Capricorn, this is again making these transitions. I've been saying over and over, this is the time to like make a transition. This is the time to make a, you know, you could argue a long-term change. This isn't the time to be like, let's start something new from a fresh start. This is stuff that we've been working on. This is stuff that, you know, it hasn't gone anywhere anytime soon, but maybe you've been in the middle of it and maybe it's time to start changing those plans. Now, Mercury is going to conjoin Venus. So, I mean, Mercury and Venus conjoin each other all the time. That's not really like the biggest deal. But the fact that Mercury goes retrograde and conjoins Venus is like figuring out the creative solution. It's like Venus has been kind of trailing Mercury, and then Mercury turns around, notices Venus, and they high five each other essentially. And so this is kind of like, you know, again, Venus, we're talking about fun, love, romance, creativity, indulgence. Yeah, there we go. Pleasure. She's in Capricorn, so, you know, creating a system, abiding by the rules, having this, you know, kind of work hard mentality. And Mercury is there, so our minds have been focused on this area. Our minds have been focused on like what is concrete, what is the plan. As Mercury turns around, it's like, how do we have fun doing this, right? I think it's been maybe easy for people to not be having a fun time as of late. You know, just given, I mean, you can give anybody any reason to not have fun. But I think this is an excellent opportunity to have more fun. Like, you know, if you're just so fixated on, I need to find the solution and, you know, it has to be fixed this right way. It's like, and, you know, maybe you're upset or frustrated that you have to go backwards, right? You know, a lot of people get upset. I mean, I get upset when I have to go backwards on something that I was so excited to move forward on. But I think as Mercury conjoins Venus, like, allow yourself to have fun making these changes. Like, have you ever seen the videos of people like pouring concrete and then like a little baby walks all over the concrete and it's like, you have to redo the concrete again, but how are you going to be mad at a kid? You know what I mean? How are you going to be mad at a little baby doing that? And so it's one of those things where I think it might be easy to get frustrated because it's Mercury stationing retrograde, right? You know, there's going to be delays, there's going to be setbacks, there's going to be miscommunications. What you thought you said or what you thought someone else said was not what was said. You know, some of you are probably going to have problems with your phones or problems with communication. Again, Mercury retrograde stuff. But try to laugh it off. Try to have some fun with it. And, you know, something that I love that, you know, eventually I'm going to start talking more and more on like my delineation channel about how I really use astrology. And something that has really changed my life with astrology is like knowing that everything happens for a reason, right? Like you can have something absolutely traumatic and devastating happening to you. And in that moment, it feels like the end of the world. But then because of that, something else happens, something else changes, something else, you know, reverts itself. And there's a happy ending at the end of the day. Now, some people are going to argue with me and be like, no, my life is always depressing, and no, life is always miserable. And well, that's how they're going to stay, because that's their mindset on it. And I think the most important thing with all of this stuff is, like, your beliefs create your reality. There are some things that I don't necessarily agree with when it comes to the law of attraction stuff and manifestation. I think a lot of people are lazy with it. They're like, let me just believe that I'm going to get everything, and they take like zero action. But your mindset around things actually matters. And, for someone that just went through, for someone that just lost everything, they can say, wow, great. Like, all of that stuff was bothering me. It was a burden. Now I'm free of all of this stuff. Versus someone could lose everything and go, oh, now my life is over and it's ruined, and what am I going to do? And of course, like, every situation is going to be different, but it's one of those times of Mercury retrogrades are such an excellent time to reframe your mind. I mean, and Mars is going retrograde through Gemini. Like, if Mars is like fights, conflicts, action, energy, it's been retrograde. And I think that this mindset shift that we have to go over with the Mercury retrograde is going to allow us a easier time for when Mars stations direct. Because when Mars stations direct around the middle of January and we start to move forward again, Mercury will station direct, and we'll have a clearer mindset of what the solution is and how to go about this stuff. So I really recommend on Thursday, like, if something is a setback or something has to change, have some fun with it. It's not the end of the world. It really isn't. Now, once that happens, the moon is going to be going into Aries and conjoining Jupiter. So there is this like lighthearted, fun, inspirational moment where, the moon's in Aries, it's like, all right, we're going to tackle this. We're going to do this. And it's conjoining Jupiter, where it's, maybe taking on a little bit more than you expected, but it's not bad. I really like the moon conjoining Jupiter here for a sense of inspiration, for a sense of hope. Something with Jupiter and Aries is action builds confidence. Sometimes you just have to do something in order to like get it out of your way. Like, Jupiter going into Aries was like, fuck it, just do it. If you don't believe in yourself, that's fine. Go for it anyway. Now that Jupiter's back in Aries and you've done this before, like, you can't just be like, if you're just blindly going into the world with confidence, like, it's going to be like, I said this like maybe last week or the week before, but like ego depletion. But if you want to build that confidence up and, you want to live your best life, like, that action and taking those, like, especially for people that struggle with anxiety, like, oh, I'm scared to do this. I know so many people that are scared to make a YouTube channel. They're scared to write that email. They're scared to write that book. And it's like, you are always going to have that fear and that anxiety until you do it. The only way to get out of anxiety and fear is by taking action. Because here's the thing, if you are scared about doing something and you've never done it before, well, there's all of these imaginary fears that you've created, versus if you just do it and you do it again and you do it again and you do it again, you don't really have that anxiety and fear anymore because you've done it a bunch of times. It's not a big deal. So I really recommend on Thursday, there is this change in mindset, and this moon's going to conjoin Jupiter. This is our first moon-Jupiter conjunction since Jupiter's going into Aries. Just do it, take that action, and don't overthink about the anxiety. And I know I always think that advice that's like, don't overthink, is really funny. But it's not just don't overthink. If you don't want to overthink, do. Put your mind and your body and focus it on something, because it's really hard for you to create imaginary fear. Like, if you're just sitting on the couch scrolling, I'm pointing to my couch here. If you're just sitting on the couch scrolling and you're seeing all this stuff and you're not doing anything, it's super easy to create these imaginary fears. But if you're in the middle of doing something, if you are focused on something, it's kind of hard. It really is difficult to have these imaginary fears and have these anxieties because you're in the middle of something. You are completely focused on something. Moon is going to make a sextile to Mars after that. So again, after this moon conjoins Jupiter, it's going to sextile Mars. And there is this sort of like, okay, now I can see a better way to do this. Now I can see a different way to do this. So I really recommend focusing on Thursday. I really like it. So we get to Friday, and the moon is going to make a sextile to Saturn, and it's going to square Mercury and Venus. So this is where, again, there's good days and there's bad days, and I'm not going to sit here and say this is a bad day, but I can imagine this being kind of frustrating because the moon's in Aries and it's going to sextile Saturn first, where there is this sort of, Saturn is the long game. Saturn is about discipline. Saturn is about maturity. And there is this sense of, it feels good to go about a situation in a more mature and adult mindset. Like, I get clients that are in their 60s and in their 80s. I always love when I get clients in their 50s and they're like, I'm old. I'm like, I just talked to someone 30 years older than you and they still don't know shit. Not that, of course, old people are wise, but, it's such a fucking awesome experience talking to old people. And I don't say old in any offensive way, because the reason I say it's an awesome experience is When you're 50, when you're 60, when you're 70, when you're 80, you're still growing up. There's this false idea in society that, oh, once you retire, you're just gonna, and you're old, you have everything figured out. You're gonna know exactly what's going on. And that's not true. Like, a lot of these people, like, I mean, a lot of these people are still like kids on the inside. Like, of course they're mature and they're grown-ups, but like everyone is just that inner kid. Something I find really interesting with my client work is people who are older have an easier time remembering their teenage and early 20s than they do like their 30s and 40s and 50s. Like they're like, I don't really remember that happened that year, but when I was 21, this happened, and when this and this happened. So there's a lot of stuff that's still connected there. But a lot of, and this is why I love astrology too, because it can kind of give us a guideline and a map of how to grow up and how to take on, and that's a Saturn lesson, right? Like, you got to grow up in certain ways. You've got to be responsible. You've got to be disciplined. You've got to be the mature one. And I think as the moon makes this sextile to Saturn, there is this good feeling of like, you know what? Like, I feel like the bigger person doing this. I feel like I have matured doing it. Now, the only issue is the moon is then going to make a square to Mercury and Venus where you have to know when to stop. An issue that I get all the time with my music is like, once I get the energy for it, I just go, 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 and I just don't want to stop. But then I lose my momentum at some point. Like maybe something kind of holds me back and I can't give it as much energy or all of my energy as I wish I could. And I think on Friday, there is this kind of moment of knowing when to maybe make a stop, maybe knowing when to call it a day. I think as the moon's in Aries squaring Mercury and Venus, another way to look at it too is, Mercury and Venus is like, you have to stick to the plan. I mean, while they're in Capricorn, you have to stick to the plan. And the moon in Aries squaring that might be like, well, but I want to do this. Like, it's kind of like, you can't set yourself up a schedule. Because like, for example, like I run my own business. I'm my own boss. I run everything myself. I have a schedule and I have a way that I do things. And oftentimes I break those rules because I'm like, oh, well, I just feel like doing it more. But then when I go above and beyond, maybe not above and beyond is the best word, but when I kind of break those rules and I kind of just do it because my energy's there, my whole system gets out of whack. And a saying that I've heard a lot recently that I really like is like, losers have goals, but winners have systems. Because a lot of the time when it comes to like hitting a certain goal, if you're so focused on the goal, you're never going to get there. Versus if you're just enjoying the ride, like I said this before too, a couple weeks ago, of like the man that enjoys the walk will walk farther than the man that enjoys the destination. And that's the same line of thinking here where, focus more on the system than just getting to where exactly it is that you need to be. And I think if you can, and this is the time to develop a system, guys. Like, systems will get you out of if it doesn't matter what situation you're in. If you want to get into a different situation, create a system, and that's going to allow you to get to that area. And make a plan, stick to the plan, and follow through. Always deliver. That stupid Storks movie is always stuck in my head. I know people probably know me saying it now. But I think about the moon's in Aries squaring Mercury and Venus, you have to know when to kind of stop, because otherwise I think if you're just kind of forcing it through, things are like the plan is going to disassemble and it's not going to work out as well as you might have thought it would have. So just be aware of that on Friday. Everything else looks good. On Saturday, though, the moon is then going to enter Taurus and Venus is going to conjoin Pluto. So the moon will be in like late Aries, and then it'll enter Taurus. And I think as the moon enters Taurus, we got everything in Capricorn, right? Then the moon in Taurus, there is this satiation that occurs. There's this feeling grounded. There's this feeling in control, feeling stable, which is really, really nice. And I wouldn't even look at this as an issue. We had a really, really, really deep dive with Venus into conjoining Pluto last winter because Venus stationed retrograde on Pluto. And the story I was telling was like, Venus stationing on Pluto is like changing our relationship to fear, changing our relationship to like commitment, changing our relationship to the systems that we implement and whether or not we feel trapped with them or whether or not we feel liberated with them. And I think as Venus conjoins Pluto, Pluto is two things, and it's power and fear. And I think if you are in this anxious mindset, I think that fear is going to be easier for you to take on. But I really want you to look at this as like, it is powerful committing to a system. It is powerful having fun with the system that you have implemented. It is powerful to have fun with the work that you have to do. Like if you have a 9-to-5 job that you absolutely hate and you're just stuck there. And I said this before, if you haven't listened to it yet, my delineation episode of living your purpose, or finding your purpose in astrology. I mean, I still get comments on that video saying it's one of the best things that I've done. And something that I talked about there is like, if you want to have a job that you love, you've got to love the job that you have. Like, you're not, because if you don't love the job that you have now, if you cannot access that part of yourself, well, guess what? You're going to go to your dream job and then you're going to hate that too. Because we're human beings. We are designed to find the problems in things, and we are designed to figure out what makes us uncomfortable and what we don't want. Like, break through on Saturday in terms of enjoying what you have in front of you, not letting that fear overcome you and letting that transmutate into power. Like, it is powerful to, like, again, enjoy the system that you have. And it is Pluto stuff. It's scary. But what I love about Pluto is this tiny little fucking, it's not even a planet anymore. I mean, I still call Pluto a planet, but it's this tiny little dot that rules all these bigger life things. And it's like, it's so funny how as human beings, we can make the smallest things in our world these biggest issues. And I think, or we can make these big issues into very small things. And I think this is one of those days to really look at what small issues are you making larger than life that are creating all this fear, and how can you make something that's a big issue into just something small and have some fun with it. So don't be afraid on Saturday. I think Saturday is a really excellent day to, again, challenge yourself. This is a Mercury retrograde. Change your mindset around this stuff. Then we get to Sunday, and the moon is then going to conjoin the North Node. It will conjoin Uranus, and Mercury will make Mercury, while it's retrograde, will sextile Neptune. So the big thing here is there is a little bit of wackiness going on, because the moon's going to be conjoining Rahu and Uranus, where it's like, I want more of this feeling. I want more security. I want more stability. I want more satiation. And as it hits Uranus, there might be this kind of innovative way of doing things. Again, and this is also, by the way, Happy New Year. Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention this. I'm thinking about going live on New Year's Eve and doing a 2022 recap. Let me know in the comments below if you want me to go live on I don't really ever go live on my YouTube channel. I go live on my Patreon all the time. But if you want me to go live and just do a 2022 recap, I'm thinking about doing it New Year's Eve, going into the new year. I think it'd be really fun. I never get to go live with you guys. So let me know in the comments if you're interested in that. I'm thinking about doing it. And if I do, I'll end up, sending out like a notification for it. But we get to the new year. Now we're in 2023. And the moon's going to conjoin the North Node, and there is this like hyper pull. There is this like, I need to go here, I need to go there, I want more of this, I want more of that. And as it conjoins Uranus later on in the day, that might cause some instability. But Mercury is going to be making this sextile to Neptune, where I think now that we're a few days into the retrograde, we've had all this stuff happen, there is this ability to, that creative vision gets unlocked again, where again, Mercury, for example, when you're an artist or when you're making anything creative, there's like what you have in your head and then what you actually put out there. And sometimes that doesn't always match up. But if you change that mindset, I think as Mercury retrograde sextiles Neptune, this is kind of like being able to, and sometimes it's like you just put it out there and you're like, it's not what I want. It's not what I had visioned, but I don't know what else I need to change about it. And I think on Sunday, when we get to the first, there is this kind of, oh, this is what I can change. This is what I can do to make it slightly better. Like, I always struggle with that with my thumbnails. Like, thumbnail art is really hard. Parker's been killing it lately, but it's these small little differences that you just have to rethink that really reshape the whole image. And so I think on Sunday, there is this ability to kind of like, again, the moon's on Rahu. So I think if you're just going after it, there is this ability to reframe or to have a better solution-oriented like mindset in terms of creating the vision that you want and getting that, vision down in black and white ink, if that makes sense. So that brings us to next week, guys. We have actually a lot more going on next week. Next week, we have Venus ingressing into Aquarius. We have Venus making a sextile to Jupiter. We're looking forward to that one. We have the full moon in Cancer next week and the Mercury Cazimi next week. We're already at the halfway point of Mercury retrograde at this point. And Mercury will make a trine to Uranus. This is such a quick Mercury retrograde. It's going to be done before you know it. And then, after that, we'll even talk about Mars going direct more so the week after that. But lots going on next week. So in terms of my final thoughts, just change. This is all about just allowing things to happen, right? And shifting your mindset. That's what a Mercury retrograde is for. And there are going to be opportunities that come up, when I say opportunities, there's going to be issues that come up that will become, or that can become opportunities for you to really make long-term mindset shifts, especially to now that, you know, Mars is retrograde in Gemini with Mercury sign, and Mercury's going to go retrograde in Capricorn. This is the time to make these mindset shifts for when Mars goes direct, excuse me. So with that being said, I love and appreciate you guys so much. Thank you so much for liking, sharing, commenting, subscribing. I love and appreciate you, and I'll be seeing you guys next week.